In a world shattered by disaster gates, betrayal cuts deeper than any blade. Once a hero, a sword god, Suho fought to protect humanity. But now, he faces the impossible, betrayal from those he trusted most. Even in his final moments, he refuses to give in. But endings aren't always the end. Suho wakes up in the past, during humanity's darkest time. Given one last chance to change his destiny, Suho must rise again, stronger, smarter, and more determined than ever. The gates still stand. His legend begins again. One man, one mission, a world to save. Now the story begins. In a mountain landscape, under bright daylight, a group of people stood together, staring at a lone figure lying before them. And Suho, a swordsman, was on the ground, holding his broken sword. He was visibly tired, his body bruised and poisoned, his breathing heavy. He looked up at the people he had once trusted most, frustration clear in his eyes. One of them muttered, mocking Suho's attempt to stay strong despite his broken sword. Nearby, Alex Morgan, a warrior, looked at him with a sense of regret. He thought it would have been easier if Suho had just joined them from the start. But he knew how stubborn people in Suho's position could be. Next to him, a girl, Suzuki Endo, a mage holding a staff glowing with dark energy, spoke with contempt. She criticized the difference in talent and ability between her and someone like Suho, who she sarcastically called a sword god. She also mentioned she didn't like men in suits, clearly showing her dislike for people like him. Suho looked at them, the pain in his eyes showing. His thoughts drifted back to the times they fought together, celebrating victories, feeling triumphant and smiling. And now, they stood against him, as if everything they had done together meant nothing. "We've been fighting together all this time," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. He demanded to know how they could betray him, how they could turn their backs on everything they had achieved. His voice became louder, more desperate as he pleaded for answers. Isabella, the healer of the group, spoke with a flat expression. She said it was unfortunate, but unavoidable. Suho was the only one opposing the current plan, the one who refused to follow along. Suho asked if they weren't ashamed of betraying everything they had fought for. He reminded them that they had already conquered one of the 5 disaster gates. If they took down the remaining 4, humanity would be safe, free from the constant threat of monsters. But now, they wanted to abandon that gate and leave humanity in danger. Suho couldn't understand how they could choose such a path. He accused them, saying they were no different from the monsters they had fought. Hexhood, the group's archer, responded calmly. He pointed out that at least they hadn't killed any humans. He explained that if all the gates were conquered, hunters like them would lose their purpose. Once seen as heroes, they would be nothing more than thugs in the eyes of the people. Hex then spoke directly to Suho, suggesting that Suho wouldn't want to become someone people feared. He tried to persuade him one last time, offering his hand and telling him to join them. Suho's face twisted with anger. He felt betrayed, and Hex's words only deepened his pain. After everything they had done together, Hex expected him to just join them as if nothing had happened. Suho rejected the offer, glaring at the group defiantly. Inside, he knew he didn't have much time. His body was poisoned by Suzuki's venom, and his wounds were too severe to heal. He understood he wouldn't survive this fight. There was only one thing left he could do. If he couldn't live, he would at least take one of them down to help ensure humanity's future. With this thought, he gripped his broken sword, a fire of determination lighting his weary eyes. His last duty as a hero, he decided, would be to sacrifice himself, even if it meant taking just one enemy with him. The group tensed as they sensed his resolve. Energy began swirling around him, his power building as he stepped forward with purpose. Alex, standing with the group, was visibly confused, while Suzuki tried to calm everyone down. She dismissed Suho, saying he was just bluffing. After all, he was just a swordsman with a broken weapon. But Hex wasn't so sure. Something felt different. There was something about Suho's energy that made him uneasy. The tension in the air became thick, and suddenly, with a burst of power, Suho moved. His sword cut through the air with deadly speed. The attack was swift and brutal, catching the group off guard. Suzuki was struck down instantly, her body falling lifelessly to the ground, while Alex screamed in agony as his arms were severed from his body. Hex acted quickly, narrowly avoiding Suho's strike and pulling Isabella to safety. He marveled at the speed of the attack, realizing that if he had been even a moment slower, he would have met the same fate. He couldn't understand how Suho was able to strike with such power. His sword was broken, and his body was poisoned. It didn't make sense. Alex, holding his left arm, his face twisted in pain, struggled to cope with the agony of losing his limb. Isabella rushed to Alex's side, her hands glowing with healing magic. But something was wrong. She looked at his wound in shock. She couldn't heal it. Her eyes widened as the truth hit her. She had heard of it before, but she had never seen it. The wound caused by Suho was beyond healing. It wasn't something magic could fix. It was a power that surpassed the human realm. The injury was too great for any spell to mend. Suho, battered and drained of energy, looked at his sword. It began to glow, an intense aura surrounding it. Hex, watching from a distance, finally understood. It was an intangible sword, formed purely by willpower. A sword made of energy. Suho felt a grim satisfaction as he realized that he had finally achieved what he had been striving for, the ultimate swordsmanship, even in his final moments. With one last surge of power, he smiled for the final time. Then, he fell, his body disappearing over the edge of the cliff. As he fell, a system notification flashed in his mind, congratulating him for reaching the realm of divine sword unity. The system praised his achievements, listing new abilities and announcing that the player system was rebooting. The world around Suho turned dark as he felt his life slipping away. He had completed his final mission, sacrificing everything to defeat his enemies. But regret lingered in his heart. He felt the cold, inevitable pull of death. Suddenly, the darkness faded, replaced by a blinding light. The light took the form of a city, one far different from the battle-worn cliffs where he had just met his end. Suho opened his eyes, disoriented. It wasn't the afterlife he had expected. Instead, it was a bustling, chaotic urban city. A firefighter appeared in his vision, his voice tense but urgent. The man told Suho that he was injured and insisted on taking him to a safe zone. When the firefighter mentioned a gate outbreak, Suho's eyes widened in surprise. He thought for sure he had died back in that dungeon. As Suho was carried through the streets, he looked around, confused. Tall buildings towered over him, but the destruction was unmistakable. A massive explosion rumbled in the distance, sending debris flying across the street. He glanced at a station sign, and the name, Cinderim, flashed before him. The name struck him hard. Cinderim Station was once a location lost to a gate outbreak, contaminated during one of humanity's darkest times. Yet here he was, witnessing the same catastrophe all over again. As he struggled to understand his situation, a goblin appeared from the shadows of the gate. Suho murmured the words, Cinderim Station Gate Outbreak, under his breath, feeling the sheer impossibility of it all. Then, out of nowhere, an arrow sliced through the air, striking the firefighter carrying him. The man let out a strangled cry, collapsing to the ground. The chaos around them grew louder, goblins shrieking, their voices swallowed by the sounds of battle. The firefighter urged Suho to run, pointing to the safe zone he had mentioned. Suho's eyes narrowed, ready to face whatever came next. He spotted an axe nearby, leaning against a pile of debris. Without thinking twice, he grabbed it. He knew he had to act fast. There was no time to hesitate, not now. Despite the firefighter's frantic warnings, Suho swung the axe with effortless precision, honed from countless battles, and took down the goblin in one clean strike. Afterward, Suho glanced at his hands, expecting to see wounds or feel pain. But there was nothing. His hands were steady and unbroken. A sudden realization hit him. This was just like before, like when he had first awakened as a player. A system notification appeared in his mind, the words glowing brightly. It congratulated him for meeting the awakening conditions and urged him to become stronger. Suho let out a laugh, filled with disbelief and amusement. The situation felt strangely familiar. Around him, the city was in ruins, with chaos unfolding everywhere. Another notification popped up, this time offering him a choice. A digital screen appeared in front of him, with 4 glowing options: warrior, mage, archer, and healer. He stared at the choices, memories flooding back. He had faced this same decision before, long ago. Back then, he had chosen the path of a warrior without hesitation. Now, he found himself standing at the same crossroad again. Suho thought back to everything that had led him to this point. His instincts urged him to pick warrior again, but something held him back. Finally, he spoke aloud, asking the system to delay his selection. There was a different path to take this time, and Suho wasn't sure which direction his future would lead him. As the chaos of the city raged on around him, the firefighter called out, desperate to pull him away from the danger. But Suho stayed rooted in place. He assured the firefighter there was no need to worry. He could handle the goblins on his own. They were just goblins after all. The firefighter hesitated but then stepped back. The goblins, with their glowing eyes and crude weapons, approached menacingly. Suho stood tall, ready for them. He unleashed his power, charging at the goblins with the same unyielding determination he had always shown. His movements were quick, his focus sharp as he ran down a burning street, dodging attacks from the goblins with precision. Every step carried the weight of his past experiences, his body reacting instinctively as he avoided their blows. He spotted a red axe amidst the debris, grabbed it, and swung it fiercely at the nearest goblin. The creature fell, and Suho's resolve only grew stronger. He was ready for more. With a determined leap, he attacked another goblin, cutting through it with powerful, precise strikes. It was as if Suho had become a force of nature, his movements fluid and unstoppable. It truly was Goblin Slayer time. Standing over the fallen creatures, Suho remained calm and composed. He muttered to himself that goblins were only a threat to beginners. They were nothing to someone like him. He spotted a goblin sword nearby, testing its weight in his hands before declaring his intent to cut down every one of them. The battle that followed was fierce as Suho moved swiftly, his strikes powerful and precise. With each swing of the sword, goblins fell one after another, their attempts to resist futile. Soon, the battlefield was silent, the only sound his heavy breathing. As he stood among the fallen, Suho realized his anger hadn't fully subsided. He had gotten carried away in the heat of battle. He reminded himself to stay calm. He couldn't afford to let emotions cloud his judgment. Looking around, a thought struck him. This wasn't just another fight. He had somehow returned to the past. This was an opportunity, a fresh start. Suddenly, several holographic panels appeared in front of him, displaying his achievements and skills. He saw basic swordsmanship skills listed, ones he hadn't thought about in a long time. Suho allowed himself a small smile, reminiscing about the early days of his journey. It was like starting over completely. The goblin sword in his hand was shorter than he would have liked, but it would work for now. At that moment, the firefighter cautiously approached him, still visibly shaken by the recent events. The firefighter stammered, asking if Suho was a player. Suho nodded, answering calmly, yes. After everything that had just happened, he already knew the answer to that question. He made his selection on the holographic screen, the system offering him a choice of powers. This time, he chose the healer class. A confirmation screen appeared, congratulating him on his decision. Suho was granted bonus stats and a new skill, Healing Light F. He turned his attention back to the firefighter, noticing the man's injuries. He approached the firefighter, inspecting his wounds, and gently placed a hand on the man's shoulder. The firefighter was confused but didn't pull away. A soft blue aura enveloped them both, signaling the activation of Suho's healing ability. Slowly, the firefighter's wounds began to heal. His eyes widened in shock as the pain faded. The firefighter struggled to find words, his voice full of disbelief. He asked if Suho was really a healer, and Suho, with a faint smile, replied, "I guess that's who I am now." Another system notification appeared, offering Suho a reward for using his healing skill. He was presented with an option to choose a weapon from the system's arsenal. Suho took a moment to think. Even though he had chosen the healer class, he still needed a weapon for combat. He summoned a glowing sword from the system's arsenal. It was a basic beginner's sword, but it would do for now. Suho examined it thoughtfully. There was still much to accomplish, and his journey was only beginning. He looked at the distant gate looming ahead, his resolve hardening. He announced his intent to go and conquer it. The firefighter, alarmed, tried to stop Suho, warning him of the dangers ahead. But Suho remained unshaken. He assured the firefighter that there was something to gain from this, a purpose he needed to fulfill. As Suho confidently walked toward the gate, memories flooded his mind. He remembered his past triumphs, the skills he had honed through years of hard work and perseverance. Just like before, the abilities gained through talent were still with him, no matter the class he chose. But he also recalled the skills tied specifically to each class, like healing magic, which only a healer could wield. He remembered Isabella's Holy Spirit Light, which had started as the basic healing light. If only he had been able to heal himself back then, things might have ended differently. This time, Suho knew it had to be different. He would be both a swordsman and a healer, perhaps even a paladin. That was the path he would walk now. He would prevent the mistakes of his past and become stronger than those who had betrayed him. As he stood before the gate, his mind lingered on the faces of his former allies. Their indifferent expressions haunted him, reminding him of how things had turned out. He had to acquire skills faster, level up quicker, if he was to surpass his past self. This gate, a premonition gate, had nearly cost him his life before. But now he was ready. His skill level might be low for now, and the challenges ahead might seem overwhelming. But that was fine. The swordsmanship engraved in his memory remained strong. Suho was determined to start over and overcome his limitations. With fire in his eyes, he stepped toward the glowing, colorful portal. The past had given him a second chance, and he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. It was time to rewrite his story. Suho walked cautiously through the dense, wet forest, his steps muffled by the soft ground beneath him. He moved slowly, eyes scanning his surroundings with careful precision, alert for any danger lurking in the shadows. The thick foliage brushed against his body as he advanced, and then he noticed something, a creature lying motionless on the ground. It was a goblin, its body lifeless, a sign of the chaos that had unfolded here. He muttered to himself that the goblins, which had once been rampaging outside the gate as if they owned the world, were now all dead inside. It seemed the goblins had fled through the gate, escaping from something far more terrifying. Suddenly, a noise broke the stillness, and Suho froze. His eyes sharpened, focusing on the source of the sound, ready for whatever danger might come next. Suho's instincts proved right. The reason behind the goblins' frantic retreat soon became clear. Two hobgoblins emerged from the shadows, their eyes burning with hostility. One was level 10, the other level 12. Their bright red skin and muscular frames made them stand out as far more dangerous than regular goblins. They glared at Suho, ready to claim him as their next prey, replacing the goblins they had just hunted. Suho smiled, unfazed by their aggressive presence. To him, they were still just goblins, no matter their size or the aura of menace they carried. With confidence, he stepped forward, preparing for the battle. The clash began as Suho met the hobgoblin's powerful strikes with his own. He dodged nimbly, but quickly realized that his sword barely made an impact. Their tough, reinforced skin was too strong for his current level to pierce. Suho knew that relying solely on strength wouldn't work. He had to find a way around their defense. If his physical attacks couldn't break through, he'd have to use his wits. The fight grew fiercer with each passing moment, but Suho focused on finding an opening. He needed to be clever, not just strong. And then he saw his chance. With a powerful leap, he soared into the air, his sword raised high. He aimed for one hobgoblin's vulnerable eye and struck with precision. The creature recoiled in pain and collapsed, falling before Suho could even react. Suho blinked, surprised. He hadn't intended to take it down so quickly, but his instincts had led him to victory. He sighed, reminding himself to be more careful with his force next time. But there was no time to second-guess. The battle wasn't over yet. A massive hobgoblin appeared from the distance, charging toward him. Its massive muscles bulged, and it moved with terrifying speed. Suho's gaze sharpened. This was his chance to push forward. Suho decided to make use of the hobgoblin's aggression. The creature lunged at him with a roar, but Suho dodged effortlessly. As he avoided each strike, he quickly realized he was growing more agile with every movement. His evasion was becoming more fluid, more natural. After several successful dodges, Suho felt a sense of improvement in himself. With each close call, his body moved quicker, more instinctively. The fight was becoming easier, and he knew that these small victories were shaping him into something stronger. Then, as the hobgoblin swung at him again, Suho blocked its blow with a sharp, precise parry. The strike was heavy, but he felt the movement come naturally, and the impact was absorbed perfectly. The hobgoblin paused, momentarily thrown off balance by the effective counter. Suho took a moment to reflect. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was mastering his abilities. With a few more successful parries, Suho felt an undeniable shift in his confidence. He had turned the battle around. Despite being outmatched in strength, he was outmaneuvering his opponent with skill and precision. The hobgoblin seemed to be tiring, its attacks growing slower and more predictable. Suho knew that with this new edge, he had the upper hand. Suho studied his fallen opponent, noting the hobgoblin's unsteady stance. Frustration was evident in its movements, and Suho knew the moment had come to end the battle. With unwavering confidence, he faced the creature, his resolve clear. He had gained the experience he needed, and now, it was time to finish what he had started. With a swift movement, his sword sliced through the air. The hobgoblin let out a strangled cry before collapsing, defeated at Suho's feet. Sunlight streamed through the dense forest, casting a warm glow over the fallen creature. Suho stood over the body, his gaze cold and focused. But there was no time for rest. He knew there were more enemies to face, more challenges ahead. He spoke aloud, his voice steady and resolute. "I'm ready to earn some real experience now." Meanwhile, outside the gate, a group of hunters gathered, their voices filled with annoyance. One of them muttered about someone barging into the gate without permission, their frustration mounting. They speculated about which faction the lone player might belong to, and one joked that if the player ended up dying inside, it would become a legendary tale. Elsewhere, two men in suits stood on a cracked city street, speaking with the firefighter who had encountered Suho. The men seemed confused and irritated, demanding more details about the person who had entered the gate. The firefighter described Suho, how he was a beginner player who had taken on a group of goblins alone and even healed the firefighter's wounds before entering the gate. He repeated Suho's words, that the young man had something to gain from this. The two suited men surveyed the scene around them. Goblin corpses littered the street, the aftermath of a battle they hadn't even been a part of. One of them stood still, staring in disbelief. They hadn't arrived late, yet the goblins had already been dealt with, and the person responsible was, of all things, a healer. The thought seemed almost absurd to them, but the evidence was undeniable. The goblin bodies lay scattered around, proof that a healer had gone into the gate alone and wiped them out. It didn't make sense. One of the men pondered aloud, gazing at the city as his expression grew serious. If all that was inside the gate were just goblins, then the challenge can't be that great. But still, it's strange. He's a healer, yet not a scratch on him. He wiped out all those goblins without breaking a sweat. What exactly is going on? Unease settled over him as he continued to inspect the destruction around him. Something about the situation didn't add up, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the healer than met the eye. The suited man stood amidst the destruction, his mind racing. It felt reckless, almost as if the healer had charged in without a clear plan. But the results spoke volumes. He couldn't ignore what he'd seen. The goblins were dead, and a healer had done it. What if, just what if, this healer succeeded in clearing the gate? What would that mean? Urgency flashed across his features as he turned to a subordinate nearby. His voice was sharp with authority as he issued his orders. Any change in the gate, report it immediately. If anyone emerges, you let me know. No delays. The subordinate nodded, taking off at once, while the suited man pulled out his phone. His mind was made up. If that healer really managed to clear the gate, they couldn't afford to let him slip away. Someone with that kind of potential needed to be brought into the fold, for both their sake and his. As the suited men went about their plans, the scene shifted back to Suho. He was deep in the heart of the forest, the air thick with magic and danger. His sword danced through the air, slashing down hobgoblins with precision, each strike cutting through them like a knife through butter. His movements were fluid, effortless, as bodies fell around him in quick succession. As he moved, he spotted one hobgoblin, its stance shaky, fear apparent in its eyes. Suho paused, a hint of amusement flickering in his gaze. He didn't need to kill this one. Instead, he decided to give it a chance to run. "Go ahead," he muttered, his voice cold but oddly casual. "Bring more of your friends." The hobgoblin screeched, its terror overwhelming any remnants of pride. It turned and fled into the depths of the forest, leaving Suho standing, watching it disappear into the shadows. Without missing a beat, Suho turned his attention inward. He opened his status window, inspecting his attributes with a critical eye. His goal was simple: balance. He'd learned that from experience. Raising all his stats evenly seemed to be the most logical approach, ensuring that no weakness could be exploited. He applied the bonus points, watching his stats rise as the numbers shifted. He noticed how quickly he was leveling up. The monsters here were nothing like the challenges he'd faced before, but the speed at which he was gaining experience was a small reminder of how far he'd come. The list of skills that had appeared was a testament to his growing power: throw, sidestep, and others, each a building block of the warrior he had once been, now reinforced by the healing abilities he had embraced. His gaze shifted downward, focusing on the bodies of the fallen hobgoblins. He searched with purpose, eyes narrowing as he scanned for something valuable. And there it was, a faintly glowing red crystal. A degrade stone. He knelt, picking it up, his expression softening into a small, satisfied smile. It wasn't the most glamorous item, but it had its uses, especially now. He estimated it could fetch about 50,000 won, which would be more than enough for a start. As he pocketed the stone, his attention drifted back to the area around him. He wasn't alone for long. A slight rustle in the trees caught his ear, and his body tensed instinctively. He raised his weapon, eyes scanning the shadows between the trees. More enemies were closing in, and his instincts told him this would be no ordinary fight. The hobgoblins were back, this time in greater numbers. As the shadows coalesced into shapes, Suho counted them. 30 or so hobgoblins, their eyes gleaming red, each one more dangerous than the last. His lips curved into a wry smile. The real fight was about to begin. "Perfect," Suho muttered to himself, readying his sword. "Time to level up before the boss shows up." The hobgoblins advanced, their growls filling the air as they circled him. It was exactly the kind of challenge he had been hoping for: more experience, more skills to master, and perhaps, just maybe, a chance to test his new healing abilities in battle. He gripped his sword tighter, prepared to take on the swarm that was fast closing in. This time he would be ready.